ISK Legacy, almost every week I keep saying, well, there was a matchup of the week or a matchup of the year even. This week, we had some tight ones, and it is leading to what is going to be the most definitive matchup. But that's a Week 15 issue. Week 14 was an awesome week. I got to watch a ton of football, because if you're looking at the wall behind me and you're wondering, why are there hats on the wall? I am in Casa del Fisher in Cambridge, Ontario, Canada, recording this week, and likely next as I'm doing an early Christmas visit to the parents. But that allowed me to actually watch Week 14, see how things shaped up, cheer and go crazy. A lot happened, obviously, in fantasy. We got some locks in. The playoff picture is looking less foggy, but not quite solved yet. So before we, though, I can't help myself. I want to jump and already start talking about next week. But first, let's focus on what happened in Week 14. Before talking about Week 14, to kick it back to Week 13, I have two kind of reflections on what I said. First one, I'm going to stop saying I'm going to be shorter. I am trying. It is clearly not working, but let's try it again now that I'm in Casa del Fisher. But number two, I went off on all this like ambiguous calls for referees, and then sure enough, like I saw it coming, this week that was the main story. So while Week 14 did present itself with a ton of things, we had another quarterback issue in terms of injuries with CJ, and we had the injury that didn't happen in Lawrence, which I still don't fully completely understand. A lot of subplots. We found out that the best three in the NFC might be the best three in the league, because the AFC is just a dumpster fire of inconsistencies, with even the Dolphins following. It feels like there's been some of those years where the second you get the number one seed, you just fall off, and that seems like that is the AFC right now in hot potato. But if we're being honest, and now that I've said I am home for this, and I flew in on the Sunday, and so I was in a room full of guys who've both played and watched a ton of football for the game that got the most amount of attention. And I'm not talking about Sunday Nighter. We watched that game. But Chiefs and Bills brought on a whole different level of introspection and critical thought afterwards. Now, I do have to say, number one, I did talk a lot about referees' calls last time, and I kind of let it out that it is this thing where sometimes there are those calls that they make, but they don't need to, and the letter of the law. And it really did raise that kind of question that we heard this week a lot. The idea that, is it what the law actually says or the rule says, or is it the spirit of it? And I will say, this is the kind of room that maybe we were a few drinks in, and every time there's a kind of a holding or a bump call or any of the offsides, someone's yelling it out and someone's calling it if they see it, and not one person saw that offside because it was an ambiguous foot. So anyone who's coming out, and side note, I've said this a ton, I really miss watching live sports, and that's one of the things that I've given up a lot for being overseas. You watch as much as you can. It's just not like over here. I do not miss, though, 24/7 sports commentary with people just think that volume is the best thing, and watching some of the part like First Take, they just yell at each other. I can't deal with it at all. But what they were yelling got to the essence of a couple things that I do want to talk about quickly. One, you would think this ambiguous kind of calling, it's true, right? If you actually watch that, if anyone has the hot take that like it was a clear violation that was horrible, it was a clear violation, but it didn't actually change the play. If you honestly think that Tony's foot being a few inches over, they're like it was all over the ball, that's a camera angle. I promise you, it did not impact the play. However, it is technically the rule. Now, I think I was pretty clear. I actually don't mind. I mean, it is such a shame that the best play I've seen in years, the most exciting play I've seen in years, and one that would be put up there with like the Music City Miracle and things like that. Like the fact that it was going to win the game, the fact that it was the most exciting part, the fact that Kelsey's having the year he is and he's at the twilight of his career. Yes, the referees robbed a phenomenal moment, and it sucks because there was no competitive advantage. But getting over that part, the two things I actually want to talk about, and again, I say quickly, but we'll see. Mahomes and Reed's reaction was super interesting to me, and I think Mahomes especially. You got to think he is so frustrated, not with the referees, sure with the referees, but I mean, they've benefited as well. And, when he had the pass interference calls the week before, it does add up, but he's also the guy that's been very magnanimous. And when MVS has dropped a bunch of balls, he's actually come out and said, I could have been better. It could have been more perfect. He's trying to, I think, be an actual good captain. And on the media, at least he's not throwing daggers at his own team, as is a trend right now in a lot of sport where when you have a problem with someone, you throw beef in the actual, the media room. I would hope they're having hard conversations in the dressing room, and I'll allude to that in a second. But I actually kind of liked that he was trying to stand up. It was icky how upset and frustrated he was. But that has to be, and I mean, if you're not really familiar with salary cap rules, because why would you be? I mean, with the NFL, with the tight cap, it is tough to invest money in both offense and defense. And I think Chiefs made it clear they won a Super Bowl because they took some of the money that they saved on Tyreek Hill and they put it into defense, which paid off last year, and they won. But they shouldn't have. Their receiving group was supposed to be crap, and they just banked on Mahomes being the best quarterback in the game, and he is, so they won. But this year now, it's almost like they expect that to happen, and the receivers are somehow worse. I mean, they've invested in some young kids, and Rice looks like he might be legit, but Moore certainly isn't. MVS drops a ton. Tony can't be your answer. Effectively, I mean, a lot of the statistics are showing it. They have the most dropped catchable balls in the league, and it's not even that close. So I think that was just a manifestation of Holmes losing his crap, and he's just frustrated because that's got to suck. But what it really made me think of, and hopefully this is the last thing I'm going to get to, as someone, I mean, you all know I coach, and I think a lot about that. And one of the things I learned after years of coaching is you think when you walk out there, I remember when I was especially younger coach, everything my team did that I didn't like almost embarrassed me because part of me thought I need to fix that. I need to have full control. And not to get too existential, but control is an illusion. And we know this. You cannot control everything. So what I learned over time is when you try and control everything, you really don't have much of a say and you don't know who you are as a team or a coach. But what helps is if you pick the things, 2 things, 5 things max, that kind of thing. These are what I stand for, and this is what I want. And my teams do this or act like this. And if you just focus on them, then you actually do get that kind of culture you want. The reason I mention this is Andy Reid gets a lot of respect, and he should. He's a very innovative coach, seems to have good relationships with his players. But this Toney situation is kind of highlighting a few things. Now, number one, Kadarius Toney, if you're not familiar, is one of the more talented receivers in the league. And I use that broadly in the league. He's an insanely talented, skilled position player, but has never gone along with the team and has always had issues with discipline, has always had issues with running routes properly, screwing up offensive plays and coverage patterns, blocking patterns. He's out of position a lot. He's actually been offside a few times in his career like this, but even more obvious than this. So this is one of those things that to me kind of exposed. So what can this team stand for if you're bringing in people that other teams have already passed on and like hard passed on after a short window of showing who they are? Unfortunately, this is kind of what you get. And so I do wish that they kept the play going, and not just because I wanted to see how Yahoo scored that. I mean, the lateral, I'm pretty sure Toney would get all the yards for that and Kelsey wouldn't get anything, but does he get the reception because he technically caught it? I actually don't know the rules to this. If you know the rules, send me a message or put it in the comments because I'd love to know how Yahoo would have scored that play, who does get the touchdown credits and etc. and how much goes to, anyway, you get it. That part would have been better. I would have preferred that as an outcome. But what I think this is going to highlight is what kind of team is the Chiefs and what do they stand for? Are they, Toney, I'm glad they didn't put him on blast, but I hope they go to the change room and they put him on blast in the film room and be like, if you just pay attention, this doesn't happen. And yeah, the referee always does the check. I know now they're saying they don't. And if anyone quotes a rule book, they think they're in the wrong. You know this. They're defensive, right? So the fact that right away the referee went all hall monitor on it and just nerded out and said, well, technically we get it, but you do. You always do. And every player that's ever played the game knows that. Every talking head that has never played the game obviously doesn't know that. But this is going to give Andy Reid a way to kind of define, can the Kansas City Chiefs, this is going to look like Mahomes is going to, for the first time, probably, if they don't get knocked out of the playoffs or knocked out early in the playoffs, they're going to have a home or an away playoff game for the first time, I think, in Mahomes' playoff career, full stop. So they get to see how they react. Can the team kind of bounce back? Are these receivers going to actually figure out how to catch a ball? Will they make an investment in the offseason? And what are Andy Reid's non-negotiables? What is he going to tolerate? So let's see. Anyway, was that shorter? I can never tell until I edit, but here's hoping, because I want to get straight to what actually matters. We are in the playoff push for fantasy. Week 14, obviously, massive implications. So I'm going to shut up. Let's get to the matchups. They say when chips are down, it brings out the best and the worst. In this particular case, Tim, you got nothing to be shy or ashamed about here. A 128 to 130 is really going to put you in contention. Solid 20 points or almost 20 points over your predicted. But Kent Rushke's here to win, and he's here to play. This was a massive week for him, and he actually did leave a few points on the board, some due to injury, some just due to the fact that he can only play 2 quarterbacks, and he had 3 that had phenomenal games. Now, Allen probably had more of the average game, but it's not like you're not going to play Allen. Fields did have a top 5 performance for us. He was our quarterback 5, but if you take a look at his bench, Surprisingly, he had Riddler, who was our quarterback 4. So Rushy actually could have put a few more points on the board, just like he actually had Hopkins out, whereas Hopkins was our wide receiver 3. Now, why did it not really mess with him? I mean, Dallas scoring double digits, it's fine, but look at the same old suspects here. DJ Moore, once again, having a massive year, our wide receiver 5. Running backs were not in the top 5, but if you can get, again, near 20 for both of them, I think the biggest disappointment he probably had and his biggest worry right now was Tyreek actually had to leave a significant chunk of that game. Now, he's done that before and he's come back and been a boss, so let's see how it works. But you see what happens here. I've already. We don't have to go to the tape on this one. The Kents swapped spots. Rushke got himself into the playoffs for now. We'll touch that one a little bit later. Tim, I want to talk just quickly about you. You had a tough go on this one. Jefferson was coming back, and you look like that could save your season, or at least save your respect here and knock him out. As you can tell by that whopping 3-0 drubbing of a score, Jefferson did get hurt and had to leave the game. How bad? We actually don't know yet at the time of taping. But you did have some other performances. Hall, actually, I don't know. I wouldn't have been too confident if I were you playing him. He was our running back too, so I'm going to shut up and just let you run your team because clearly you know what you're doing. Jones definitely was a huge disappointment for you, but Kupp finally had one of the weeks that you've been waiting for. He was our wide receiver 4. So well done there, sir. You did leave a few points in the bench. Achane, I probably would have started Achane over Hall, but I would have lost. So well, like I said, Timmer, keep playing spoiler. Let's see if you can finish the year on momentum and have a strong week next week. But Kent, you're going to get all of our attention in a minute. You are in a very pivotal matchup. But let's talk about the other matchups first. Then we'll get back to you. In the high-scoring matchup of the week, which bodes well, we had Matt, who just was under Kent for the top scorer of the week. Now, Matt obviously got some bad news last week when suffered a pretty bad loss that really shook him. But how does he respond? Punches up, knocks up Connor. Well, not knocks up Connor and Sheamus. That is an unfortunate use of terms. Knocks them not down or not out, little down. Anyway, they could have jumped ahead, as we're going to find out in a minute. They couldn't get past Woody on this one, so well done. Well, great rebound in that case. Talking about the Cooper Troopers here, because they're going to be an interesting one moving forward. You're not really getting, again, another week in a row where Denver slightly underperforms. KC way more underperforms at the quarterback spot. That's definitely surprising. Now, your running backs did fine for you. They both overpredicted. Nobody in the top 5 in their position, but aside from, I'd say, Diggs, no one really having a bad matchup. And obviously the Jets really helped you out. They were in the top 5. I was looking at skill position on that one. They were our defense 5 on that one. But you got to be happy with people like Pak Nakua coming out a little bit. Pittman continuing his fantastic year. And on your bench, you do tend to have a lot of depth, but you did have a few buys, and you're obviously reeling with your tight end injuries. You made all the right calls. I mean, even if Johnson was in there, wouldn't have really helped you out, but under 10, you always got to look. Woody, you actually could have gone off more. Hurts had a horrible game. This is about as bad as he's been all year in terms of fantasy points. And Nico Collins got knocked out early and often. Well, just the once, but you know what I'm talking about. He was out. Let's take a look at him for next week and see how he goes. Your running backs definitely carried you. Eckler was not in the top 5, but he was close. Barkley here in your flex spot was the running back 5. And as you can see, just out of here was Mozart in our running back 6. You are the only other defense other than the Jets. We had our only 2 here in the top 5. The Saints obviously having the best defense, 27 points. Are you freaking kidding me? They were your tough scorer. They were our top defense. So hats off to you. You also were gutsy. You went with Goddard. He hasn't had a great year, but he's coming back off an injury. Maybe they're going to use him again. I guess we'll see. You did leave a few points on the bench as well, and actually your tight end that you put down here was our tight end 2, so he could have helped you out even more, but you didn't need him. And Rice, one of the rare Chiefs that actually had a great game. And Beckham, not in the top 5, but you got to love that you got him on the bench moving forward. So are you technically out of it? Are you mathematically out of it? Again, we're going to have to wait till the end. I'm just dragging on suspense, right? We'll see when we get to the table. While I was the 3rd highest scoring winner, I was actually the 4th highest scoring team, but the Cooper Troopers did outscore me. But this was the tight matchup that we were hoping for here. Within 4 points, Gene, I almost cost you your overall number 1. Had Connor worked that one out, this one would have flipped. But don't worry, you kept it. And I needed it, man. I needed this win. I was already throwing in the towel pretty much. This is a huge help for me. Now, taking a look at your team first, Debo has been your second half MVP, and I don't even think it's close. And I even think legitimately he's not up for MVP in the actual league. But in terms of an actual most valuable, Look at the games when Debo's out, and all of a sudden Purdy's no good. But then when he's in, suddenly Purdy's a potential MVP. Just keep your eye on that one. Just you can steal that point. You can tell people you came up with it. Other than that, you just had a solid slew of good performances, except for obviously Herbert, who got hurt. I would take a look at that. You do have some depth here. CJ Stroud got hurt. So let's call a spade a spade. I was worried for a reason. If you actually had a healthy quarterback, you would have beaten me. I'm not too proud to say it, but you didn't, and you didn't. So it is what it is. Now you do have a few, points of mobility here, but sadly for you, none of them are quarterbacks. So my guess is by the time of this taping, the waiver wire predictions aren't out yet. My guess is you're going to go fishing for a QB. Now, Herbert's might be worse. It looks like CJ right now is predicted to potentially, but they don't know. It's very early days, so keep an eye. On the plus side, not only did your running backs go off in terms of over their predicted, or at least at, TJ did fine. Reed has been a huge pickup for you. He was making me sweat last night. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm recording this on the Tuesday. I watched the Monday Nighter. And you can tell by the point total here. There's a reason I stayed up to the end of that particular game. In terms of me, the biggest thing that actually kind of haunted me is when I took off for my flight that started just before the game started for the 1 o'clock Eastern time kickoff. Hill was healthy and going to play, and then he didn't. So that bagel really hurt me. But I did rely on a few heavy performances. Sometimes you get those weeks where you get points from everybody. Really, for me, White was great. He's actually been a huge steal this year. He was the running back 4. Browning, what a great pickup. Patting on the back there, Michael David. He was our quarterback 3. Lamar was our quarterback 1. So that's how I won. I had a few top heavy performances that balanced out my garbage. Now, Cleveland was just outside of the top 5 in defense, but I wasn't winning this on defense. You know, you don't make friends with salad kids. Now, Cook, I could have put in there. He was running back 3. That would have helped, but I really didn't think he'd be in the game script, and then he sure was. So clearly I know only partially what I'm doing. I also didn't think Lawrence would even play, so what the crap do I know? Anyway, this was actually a pretty pivotal matchup for me more than it was for Eugene, because you didn't lose any ground, right? You're still in that tie for first overall, and number 1 overall is still within your grasp. But man, did I need this win. Thanks, buddy. The prediction was quite close here. Your team's lineup record-wise, not so much. And then the result, sorry, Marco. But Jeff, you're finishing on a run, buddy. And I got to tell you, that's got to make you feel at least good. I mean, I know not everyone actually values things like playoff momentum or fantasy momentum, because it doesn't actually physically exist in reality. But you know I believe in it. So way to finish strong here, buddy. Let's see if you can just do one more and maybe even win that little consolation bracket that pops up. Purdy's been huge for you, and as I mentioned, he's getting MVP buzz for a reason. He was our quarterback 2. Stafford obviously did well enough to say that your quarterbacks were your leading candidates. And then everybody else except for Charbonnet just kind of did what they should or close to it. So that's where you were looking. Didn't have a whole lot on the bench, so you made all the right calls. So well done. Big win. Marco, Wilson stepped up for you. Pollard and Adams did okay. And then after that, you just had a series of probably underperformances. Can't be too mad about Minshew, but you just didn't get the week that Love has been giving you for the last couple. And obviously Schultz not getting any love. No bueno for you. Now, again, keep it up. You're still fighting on the bench. We don't expect you to roll over and play die. Who knows? Maybe get to play spoiler next week, or like I said, maybe build the momentum. Either way, never play Atlanta's defense again. Just don't do it, man. This is probably one of those rare instances that Kent is glad he's not in Kenya, because Rennie would, I'm sure, love to remind him about how this went and what this meant to him. This was definitely Rennie in full out spoiler, just loving the fact that he can tear down someone's dream. Although in his defense, or maybe in Maxon's, I'm not sure, Maxon didn't really put up much of a fight here. He kind of made this one was over at almost kickoff. Now, taking a look at Rennie's performance, he did have some guys come out of the gates pretty strong. London was probably the biggest surprise. This is by far, I believe, his best week. He was our wide receiver 2. And then he had a series of solid performances, except for Pierce and arguably his kicker, or sorry, not his kicker, his replacement for a quarterback. And Algiers didn't get the ball. Bijan was clearly carrying the load. Now, Elliott, this would have been a huge start if you would have gambled. He was our running back 1, so that would have helped you. You could have spiked the ball even worse. But Maxon just fell coming straight out of the gates. That's when Will Levis is by far, and McCaffrey obviously are your 2 studs. Sorry, man, it's just not going to make it happen. Your running backs underperformed outside of McCaffrey, and then Gabe Dave. He's been high and low. He's won you weeks, and then he just bagels it. Jamar Chase too. Shockingly, Browning going off and Chase not getting too many sniffs. that doesn't bode well for you. Now, this is the fifth of the matchup, so I'm not going to spend any more time talking about this one, but I'd love to tell you what it means going into next week, the last week of the regular season. Matchups are the matchups, but let's take a look at our table. Now, technically, I do not clinch. If I lose and both the Kents win, which isn't possible, it could move. I'm not jinxing myself, but this win all but I think pretty much puts me in the playoffs because, as you're going to see in a minute, only one of those two Kents can take down the week, and that's going to bode well for me. Everybody else is effectively out of it for the top four. This will be a little more interesting next year when we go to 6, so do bear that in mind. So that's where some of this might come into play. But this is just what it comes down to. Now, there's really two entities that care. Number one, we do have a tie for first place, and there's a vested interest in finishing first in the regular season financially. So, Gene the Machine, you're going against Marco. If you win and the point differential isn't massive, you probably lock up the number one overall. Connor, Seamus, you're hoping for them to slip. You win, and you're through, because I think the point differential is just too much unless you really, really go off and Gene really spikes the ball. But you know what? In any year, this year has just been riddled with injuries, so it can happen, right? If you get a couple first quarter injuries, I don't want to say it because I don't want to jinx it. Everybody else, I hope they have a competitive week. I hope you make side bets. I hope you trash talk a little bit. But our league now comes down to one matchup to make the playoffs. The one Kent to rule them all. The tall or the average sized. Who's it going to take it down? Now, right now, I don't think there's a hotter team in the league other than Rushke. Not only has he won 4 in a row, but he's actually been the top scorer in our league. I think 3 of those 4 weeks, or at least 2 of those 4 weeks. I can go back and double check if needs be. Whereas Maxon's a yo-yo. He went off, had an epic matchup last week. This one farted and tripped coming out of the car in the parking lot. So which Kent will rise to the top? Which Maxon will we see? Only time will tell. But if this isn't why you love fantasy, then I don't know why you're in a league like this. So folks, week 15 is our last week of the regular season. Then we hit the playoffs. I want it now. I want it to start right now. I love fantasy sports.